let me replace some of the terminology he uses with something a little more understandable for you. Okay, he says, we believe that you, meaning God, that you are greater than which, you are something greater than which cannot be thought, that you are perfect. Perfect. Now, the meaning of perfect in philosophical terms is not like when you say, oh, I have the perfect girlfriend or the perfect boyfriend. No, they can't be perfect. Perfect is something which contains everything, and only one being can be truly perfect. Because if there are two of them, then what the one contains, the other one is lacking, meaning none of them would be perfect. We are not perfect because I am a male, but I'm not a female. I am this, but I'm not that. So I don't contain everything. I'm not perfect. Okay? So we believe that you are perfect, he says. Okay? Greater than which cannot be thought. And he goes on to say, or maybe is it true as, and then he quotes someone in the Bible who says, the fool said in his heart there is no God. Maybe, was he right? He says. But certainly that same fool who denies the existence of God, having heard what I just said, perfect, something greater than which cannot be thought, perfect, it contains everything, understands what he heard. And what he understands is in his thought, is in his head. Even if he doesn't think it exists, in reality, at least the idea is in his head, right? So that's the first part of his proof. We understand the notion of a perfect being. For it is one thing for something to exist in a person's thought, and quite another for the person to think that that thing exists. And then he gives you an example. For when a painter thinks ahead to what he will paint, he has that picture in his thought. So you're going to paint something, you have the idea of what you want to paint, right? But he does not yet think that it exists because he has not painted it yet. That's clear. But then once he has painted it, he has it in his thought, and he also thinks that it exists because he has done it, he has painted it. So now it exists in his thought and outside his thought. Thus, even the fool, meaning even the atheistic person, he really means that, even the fool is compelled to grant that something greater than which cannot be thought. Even those who don't believe in God must at least grant that a perfect being exists in thought, at least in their heads, exists. And certainly, that greater than which cannot be thought cannot exist only in thought. This is a crucial step, okay? Certainly, that which is so even the fool is compelled to grant that something greater than which cannot be thought. Even the atheist must acknowledge that a perfect being exists at least in his thought, in his head. Okay? But then he goes on to say, certainly that perfect being, if it exists only in thought, could also be thought of as existing in reality as well, which means the perfect being that you have in your mind is not truly perfect if it doesn't exist also outside your head. And therefore, it wouldn't make sense to say that the perfect being exists only in your head. Because if he exists only in your head, I can think of a more perfect one, which exists only in your head, which exists in your head and outside your head too. And that would be the true perfect being. How could a perfect being be missing, be lacking such an important perfection as existence? He says. So the perfect being must exist by definition, not just in your head, but outside your head too. Now, a monk called Gonilus replied to this argument by saying, well, then what? What about the perfect island? I think there is a perfect island somewhere. And so since it is in my head, it should exist also somewhere out there, because I can think of it. Well, why is that counter-argument not valid? Because an island is not perfect. An island is missing many things. An island is an island, it's not something else, it's not an ocean. And therefore, there is no need to say that it must contain existence as a perfection. Because the same as it's missing many other things, it may be missing existence. But when you say that a perfect being, you're talking about the perfect being, then it implies that either it has all possible perfections, including existence, or he's not perfect. And therefore, the one I'm thinking about is truly perfect, and that must exist inside my head and outside my head as well. Then he goes on to say that the existence of God is more real than our existence. That we are more justified in doubting our own existence than in doubting the existence of God. How can that be? Well, because we are not perfect. And so our existence is not necessary, but the existence of God must be necessary. What is more perfect? A being whose existence is necessary, or a being whose existence is not necessary? A being whose existence is necessary, right? Therefore, God's existence, because he's perfect, must be necessary. But your existence and your existence is not necessary. If you weren't here today, we wouldn't be missing you. Sorry. If I weren't here today, someone else would be teaching this class. Our existence is not necessary. Therefore, God's existence is more real than our own existence because it is necessary. Okay, well, you may find this argument not so convincing. It's an argument on which there has been a debate going on for centuries and centuries, okay? And volumes have been written on the ontological argument. I just wanted you to know this. It's a matter of definition. The word God equals the being that necessarily exists. That's what the word God means for St. Anselm. Now, who could the being that necessarily exists not exist? Wouldn't make sense, right? It'd be a contradiction. So that's his point. So he must necessarily exist. So with this, we've covered the religious philosophical answer to materialism. Materialism says there is only matter and nothing else. And religion says, or religious philosophy in this case says, okay, if that is the case, how do you explain this? How do you explain origins? How do you explain the laws of the universe? How do you explain really the way nature has evolved to this perfection? And materialism really, especially for the first two questions, has no satisfactory answer. Now, a word of warning. Some people who don't like to think about religion, who don't want to put religion or religious ideologies in their way of thinking, will often talk about Mother Nature and how wise Mother Nature is. I'm sure you've heard that before, right? When we look at nature, how it works, everything in harmony, how it seems to provide for everything, how wise Mother Nature. Well, I have bad news for you. I'm sorry. There is no such a thing as Mother Nature. Either there is a father, what we call a God, or there is nothing. There's just a combination of things working together in nature. Either there is an intelligence behind and a power, what we call God, or there is nothing else. There is no such a thing as Mother Nature. Okay? There is not such a thing as Mother Nature. Now, one person to think in this intermediate way, with this Mother Nature notion, was Einstein. He did not believe in a personal God, but still he found it hard to believe that nature was completely impersonal and completely blind. So he had this anthropomorphic view of nature, like there is some intelligence behind moving all of this, but he wouldn't give it the word God as a personal God.